Today we're going to be in John chapter 6. But before we get there, have you ever been set up to learn something? I'm not talking about set up for a crime, set up for a blind date. Have you ever been set up to learn something? I'll never forget a moment that my dad put a hat down on the ground and handed me a deck of cards. And he says, "How many cards do you think you can throw into that hat?" And so I opened the deck and I started flinging those cards. And I got all 52, and I think I might have gotten one or two in that hat. And my dad said, "I bet I can get all 52. And I said, "No, there is no way that you can." And being a dad, he said, "Well, pick them all up and I'll show you." So I picked up all the cards. He put them in his hand. He put them back into the sleeve, and he threw the whole deck right into the hat. And he said, "Son, you can think outside of the box to solve problems." There was a lesson that my dad set me up for. Well, today we're going to look at a setup that Jesus had. And not only was it a setup, it was a double setup. And it's actually a very familiar story in John chapter 6. My hope is that today we see it in a brand new light. So what is the story? It is the feeding of the 5,000, a very familiar miracle of Jesus. Matter of fact, it's the only miracle that is recorded in all four Gospels. And so we are going to focus in on John's telling of this event in John chapter 6. And here's what it says starting in verse 1. It says, "After this, Jesus crossed the Sea of Galilee," or Tiberias. Now, this kind of gives us a location. One of the things that we have been doing in this series as we go through these different accounts in the book of John, we want to put them on a map because these things really happened. They're in a real place. And so there are all the places that we've already talked about in the Gospel of John. And then that lake there at the top, that is the Sea of Galilee. They're near the very, very top. And there's actually multiple names for this lake in the scripture. Matter of fact, there's four. But here we see two of those names, the Sea of Galilee or Lake Tiberias. It was called the Sea of Galilee in New Testament times by the Jewish people because it was the lake that was right next to the region of Galilee. However, the Romans, they preferred to call it Lake Tiberias. And the reason why is in 20 AD, when Jesus was around 20 years old, Herod wanted to honor Caesar Tiberius, and so he established a brand new town on this beautiful lake and named it after the Caesar. And so the Romans preferred to call it Lake Tiberias. Now, Luke actually tells us in his account of this story the specific place on the lake where they were. They were in Bethsaida. They actually landed in Bethsaida there in the northeast part of the lake, and that is where this event takes place. Now, what's interesting is all the gospel writers, they give us all different details, not only of this account, but any account that they reference in multiple gospels. And what's really neat about that is we see all of their different perspectives on these different events without them getting their story straight, right? You probably heard of law enforcement. One of the things that they watch out for is if they interview multiple witnesses and all the witnesses say the exact same thing, that's actually a sign that that is not what happened, because everyone's going to have a slightly different perspective on what happened. Parents, you've probably also dealt with this at home. I'll never forget, my parents had these perfect for throwing at your brother pillows in our living room. They were firm, they were thin, and around the edge they had this rope garnish. And you could get those things and you could throw them faster than a baseball. I mean, they were wonderful. And so we played dodgeball all the time in my living room when my parents were not around. And my mom liked breakable knickknacks. And so this was not a good combination. And I'll never forget, breaking one of her hummingbird knickknacks. And what's the first thing you do? The first thing you do is you go check out, is it broken? Okay, yes, it is, and I cannot repair this. Second thing you do is you say, all right, look, this is what happened, okay? Brother, they're going to separate us, and they're going to want the story. We were both doing our homework at the table, and the cat jumped from this couch to this couch to this couch and broke it. Obviously, we were telling a story. I finally wised up and realized I could not pull anything over on my parents, and so I just started meeting my parents with an apology when something like that happened. But what we get in the Gospels is we get these stories that are the same story. Different details are brought out in these different stories. And what law enforcement calls this is unintentional support. So if you get one story, and this story might raise a question, you're like, why did that happen like that? They didn't answer that. And then in another story, they may leave out something that was said here, but in another story, they bring out a detail. They're like, oh, now I see why this happened in this other story. They have their unique perspectives on the story. And what we're going to see is we see these unique perspectives bringing all of these details to light. And this is why one of the reasons that you can trust the Bible, because you have all of this unintentional support that's going on. And there's actually a guy named J. Warner Wallace, and he actually wrote a book on all of the unintentional support that he sees throughout the Gospels, and he wrote that as a cold case detective. It's a fascinating book if you want to pick up cold case Christianity. And so we're going to see some of this unintentional support here in just a few verses. So continuing on with verse 2, it says, a huge crowd was following him. Why? Because they saw the signs that he was performing by healing the sick. Now I want you to kind of hold on to that for just a minute. That will come back up later. And then it says in verse 3, Jesus went up a mountain and sat down there with his disciples. So they are at a lake and also at a mountain. Sounds like a beautiful place. Good news for you. We had a staff member recently take a trip to Israel, and let me show you her photo she was in the middle of the Sea of Galilee towards the mountains. So this was not one of the mountains that Jesus was actually sitting on, but this region is surrounded by mountains like this. So this is how Jesus is up at an elevated spot, and we're going to get to this in a minute. That's how so many people can be down there on the valley as it goes into a beach, and it is a natural amphitheater for his voice to carry. Verse 4, it says, now the Passover, a Jewish festival, was near. So when's the Passover? Typically, it takes place in the month of April. That's going to be a crucial detail here in just a minute. So when Jesus looked up and noticed a huge crowd coming towards him, he asked Philip, where will we buy bread so that these people can eat? So Jesus, he has these 12 disciples, okay? He has this crowd down below. He's got his 12 disciples close. Why does he single out Philip? Why doesn't he go, hey, John, what should we go eat? Well, Luke gives us the unintentional support of why he would have asked Philip. Because Philip is from Bethsaida. When you want to know where to eat, you ask a local, right? And so he looks at Philip. Hey, you're from around here. Where will we buy bread for these people to eat? Verse 6, he asked this to test him, for he knew what he was going to do. This was a setup by Jesus. I'm about to feed all these people, but Philip, where do you think we could get all of this food? Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to have a little. A denarius is about $200 today, so if you multiply that by 200, we're talking about $40,000, give or take. So Philip's like, we got this crowd down here. Even if we had 40 grand, we could not feed all of these people enough. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon's brother, Simon Peter and Andrew, also from Bethsaida, said to him, well, there's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many. Now, you guys know me. I love to show as I tell. So can I show you what I've always imagined this to look like? I'll be right back. All right, so when he says basket, this is kind of what I've always thought, right? Like he brings out a laundry basket. This boy, I don't know why he's there in the crowd with this giant basket, but he's got this basket, and it says he has 5 loaves of bread. So this is also what I think about, right? I don't know why he walks around with 5 loaves of bread in a laundry basket, but this is what I think. Some of you understand why I specifically picked Wonder Bread. Others of you will get that later. And then I think about a fish. And growing up fishing, this is what I think about when I think about fish. I think that there's a boy walking around the Sea of Galilee with 5 loaves of Wonder Bread and 2 largemouth bass. That's what I've always thought. In reality, the Greek word means small basket. There's actually a different word for a big basket like a laundry basket. So this boy, he had his lunchbox. And that's what he has in this crowd. And when they were talking about the fish, the type of fish that they catch in the Sea of Galilee is not largemouth bass. It's a version of sardines. So this boy has 2 sardines, and when they refer to loaves of bread, barley bread in particular, this is what they're talking about. It looks more like a cookie, right? So this boy, he had what we would call 5 cookies and 2 sardines. And so when Andrew says, hey, we got a guy with, just a little bit there, it's just a little bit. Not that, 5 loaves of Wonder Bread and 2 bass would feed 5,000, but it's even less than you probably thought. Now, another cool piece of unintentional support there is it specifically mentions in the book of John that it is barley that was harvested in the springtime. If this was a forgery hundreds of years later in a different place, they would not have known that the barley harvest takes place before the Passover. And so there's another bit of unintended support there. So Jesus, he knows what he's going to do. He's got his lunchbox. Verse 10, Jesus said to the disciples, have the people sit down. Again, it's springtime. There's plenty of grass in that place, so they sat down. And then we get this here. It says the men numbered about 5,000. And when we talk about feeding of the 5,000, it's a bit of a misnomer to us because that crowd was 5,000 men plus their families. You might be like, well, why did they just count the men? Well, their counting structure was not counting individuals. They were counting by households. And so when he says it numbered about 5,000 men, they're counting heads of households here. So if you work out the demographic information, he's got this crowd of probably 20,000 people that he sees in this valley. No wonder the disciples were like, hey, we just got to send them away. There's no way we can feed all of these people. That's a detail another gospel brings out. And if you're struggling to just know how big of a crowd was down there and how big of a task that Jesus was asking Philip to do, 20,000 people is about the same size as Q2 Stadium in Austin at capacity. So it would be like Jesus taking your lunch from work and saying, I'm going to feed the entire capacity of Austin FC Stadium, okay? This was a big, big deal. This is what happened. It says, then Jesus, he took the loaves, again, little loaves, and it says, after giving thanks, he gives thanks to God. That's why we as Christians pray before our meals, because we're following the example of Christ here in the feeding of the 5,000. It says he distributed them to those who were seated. So also with the fish, as much as they wanted. Then verse 12 says, when they were full, the entire crowd of 20,000 people had as much as they wanted, and when they were full, he told the disciples, collect the leftovers so that nothing is wasted. So they collected them and filled 12 more baskets with the pieces from the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. So I want you to see this here. He feeds a crowd of 20,000 with a lunchbox and then has enough leftovers to fill 12 lunchboxes. One lunchbox, one basket for each disciple. He is showing them what he can do. It was when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. Therefore, when Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. People like a free lunch. And the guy that can feed 20,000 like that, we need to make that guy king, right? So they try to do that. Jesus is like, hey, this is not my time. And so he withdraws. So what lesson did Jesus teach his disciples here? I think it's this, that he is God and he can do anything. God, by definition, as the creator, is beyond the natural. He is beyond nature. And so when we say that something is beyond something else, we call it super, right? Like Superman can do things beyond what a man can do. So do you know what word we say for someone who can act beyond the natural? Supernatural. Believing in the supernatural does not deny anything about the natural. It just says that we believe that the God who put the natural order in place can choose to work beyond it if he wants to do so. So how did Christ do it? I don't know. Being that kid from the 90s, it sounds to me like it's an infinite ammo cheat code, okay? He's always pulling out just bread and fish as he goes, and it's just never running out. I'm not sure exactly how he did it, but guess what? He did, because he is God and can do anything. My dad, who has a funny way with words, one time just said something, and then it just has stuck forever. Okay, we would always doubt my dad. My dad would say, hey, I want you to do this. I'm like, Dad, I don't think that's going to work. And he would say, yes, it is. And just one time he blurted out, son, if I tell you an ant can pull a freight train, don't argue. Just hook him up. And so still to this day, we say that phrase around my parents' house. Hey, it's the same with God. If God says, hey, I can do this, we don't go, God, I'm really not sure. We believe in what he says because he can do anything he chooses to do. I think the second lesson that we have to learn is this. What we have is not enough. What I have is not enough. What you have is not enough. A kid had to feed Q2 Stadium with his lunch. He did not have enough. Can I tell you that God will give you more than you can handle? God will give you more than you can handle. But can I tell you something that's even more true than this right here? What you have is enough in the hands of God. This boy with the 5 and the 2, he was not enough. But that same 5 and 2 in the hands of Jesus was so much that it was more than enough, and they had 12 baskets of leftovers. I tell this story at Antioch 101, and so I'm going to give an abbreviated version. For those of you who have been to Antioch 101, you know the details. For those of you who aren't, we've got one coming up in the month of June. We would love for you to join us and hear the rest of the story. But I'll never forget, as our church was looking around for land to purchase back in 2019, we tried so hard. We were muscling our way to try to find land. And we found a great spot, and God said, no. We found another spot. He closed that door too. And finally, we just said, God, we're just going to give this to you because we're trying and we're not getting anywhere. And the coolest story, I think, of our church took place in that moment. And we have this piece of land that we hopefully will start building on very, very soon. And it's one of the most amazing stories of God's providence that I've ever heard. And if you're curious about that story, I'd love to see you at Antioch 101. It's going to be great. But we were trying to muscle our way through it, but we just finally said, God, you take it and you come through in a big way. And learning that lesson, I think, was one of the most pivotal things in the life of our church. Because right after that, there was another very providential story of 2020 when we were meeting in an elementary school. And way before COVID even hit and the school shut down, God had provided another place for us to go so that we did not have to stop meeting because we didn't have a place. I also love to tell that story and how God worked providentially there too. But again, Antioch 101 is coming up in the month of June. See, a lot of us, we try to muscle through life and we're just like, God, I'm gonna do it. Will you bless it? A lot of us, we read Philippians 4:13 and we read it like this: I am able to do all things. But Paul continues, through Christ who strengthens me. The Christian life is not about muscling through and trying to do things on our own. It's about relying on Christ and leaning on Christ. But it's not just about the struggles that we lean on Christ and we have Christ's strength. It's also in the mission that he has given us. We work hard, yes, but we rely on Christ as we lead people to follow Christ in a life-changing way. There have been so many instances recently that I've had to walk into a room, and as I walked into the room, I know there's a very difficult situation that someone is going to be asking me, what should I do? How should I process what's going on? And in my head, I just have to go, God, give me the words to say, because I don't have them. See, a lot of us, we think that movements of God are when there's a team of like super Christians who go in like the Avengers, right? Like the town is being destroyed, and there's these super Christians who are doing all the work while the town is just kind of there clapping, right? Can I tell you, that's not how movements of God happen. Movements of God actually happen more like this scene from Finding Nemo. All the fish are being pulled up, and they all decide to start swimming in the same direction together. They overwhelm the boat and are freed, not because they were super strong, but because they all swam in the same direction. Can I tell you, there's no such thing as super Christians, but a church full of people all swimming in the same directions. That is how God has changed the world time and time and time again. So you may feel like you're that boy with just 5 loaves and 2 fish, and the need is feeding 20,000 people. I don't have the words to say. I don't have the right experience. I don't think that I'm ready. Can I tell you, you are that boy with 5 and 2, and I'm that boy with 5 and 2, and all God is asking us to do is to bring what little we have, and he can do more than we can ask or imagine through our faithfulness. We recently got to baptize someone, and it perfectly illustrated this concept. This person had known about Christ, but had never really followed him. And it wasn't because of something amazing that Andy said. It wasn't because she turned on YouTube and found this just amazing presentation of the gospel that she became a fully devoted follower of Christ. She had people that lived around her that became her friend, that shared with her the good news about Jesus Christ. And they are the ones that led her. That is a movement of God. That is how God works, through faithful people just doing what they are called to do. Now, I told you this was a double setup. So here's the second setup. The disciples, if you continue reading, the disciples get into the boat. They cross the sea to the other side, or the lake, if you will. Jesus, not in the boat, decides he's going to just, walk across the lake because he's God and he can do that. And so this is where he walks on water. And you can actually kind of see this on a map. He walks from Bethsaida to Capernaum. And it says, verse 22, the next day, the crowd that had stayed on the other side of the sea saw that there happened to only be one boat. Okay, so they were still where Jesus originally was when they got back up. They also saw that Jesus had not boarded the boat with his disciples, but that the disciples had gone off alone. Some boats from Tiberias came near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, so again, the crowd, if we pull that map back up, the crowd is still in Bethsaida. Some boats from Tiberias come to Bethsaida, and they say, hey, did Jesus go over there? And they're like, no, we hadn't seen Jesus over here. Like, well, okay, apparently he went to Capernaum. And so they all decide that they too are going to go to Capernaum. Some of them take a boat, some of them walk around. It says they got into the boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you get here? Jesus answered, truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs, not because you're accepting the proof of who I am, but because you ate the loaves and were filled. He said, you're seeking me to be entertained. You're seeking me to be fed, not for you're actually following me. Jesus continued, don't work for the food that perishes, but for the food that lasts for eternal life. Don't focus on the bread and the loaves. Focus on eternal things. He says, which the Son of Man will give you. He will give you these eternal things because God the Father has set his seal of approval on him. And then guess what? The crowd completely misses the point. They say in verse 28, what can we do to perform the works of God? We can do cool tricks too? That's what they want to know. Jesus replied, this is the work of God, that you believe in the one he has sent. He's calling them not to do miracles, but to place their faith in him as Messiah. But still wanting to see cool stuff, they continue to press Jesus. What sign then are you going to do so that we may see and believe you? What are you going to perform? Again, they are wanting a show. Apparently yesterday's feeding was not enough. They wanted more stuff. And they actually tried to manipulate Jesus in the next verse. They're going to cite the Old Testament in order to pressure Jesus into feeding them again. Verse 31, our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, just as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, Moses didn't give you bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. He's talking about himself. And they go back and forth for a bit, but if we skip down to verse 47, he starts to wrap it up. He says, truly I tell you, anyone who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness. He's agreeing. And they died. Manna was a temporary miracle. It would come, they would eat it that day, and then they would have to rely on God to send the manna again the next day. It was a temporary miracle. It was a sign. It was a wonder to point people to God. He said, look, all of these signs and wonders point people to me, but they are not the point. Verse 50, this is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that anyone may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. The real miracle is not that Jesus can feed 20,000 people with a boy's lunch. The real miracle is that you and I can be saved from our sin, that we can be given a right relationship with God, not because of the good stuff that we've done, not because of the earning that we do, but because of the work of Jesus Christ. So can I ask you a question? Have you placed your faith in Jesus Christ? Not just, I know about him. Not just, I like his teachings. Not just, hey, I kind of want to do my own thing, kind of Jesus. I just kind of pick and choose like a buffet. Have you truly placed your faith? Have you believed in Christ Jesus for the forgiveness of your sin? Do you have that right relationship with God? If not, today is the day of salvation. Today is the day that God is calling you to place your faith in him.